Hey everybody, and welcome back. This is going to be hopefully the first of a series of videos in which we will be creating our zombie smashing game. Now this is going to be sort of tailor-made more so towards people who are just getting into game development and who are beginners, and as such I will be trying to take my time in explaining everything as it happens on the screen. So without further ado, we're just going to jump into it. Now, right in front of you, what you see is a brand new blank Unity project. All I've done is just created the empty project and hit 2D in the settings. And that's what we essentially get here. So the first thing that what I'm going to do in this video is we're going to be setting up the scene for the rest of the game, and I'm also going to kind of trying to be explaining to you how I'm going to set up the project and how we're going to be essentially building it. So the first thing that we need is I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop some resources into this project. Now, as you can see, there are going to be a bunch of sprites and some audio files that they're going to be loading in, and I will provide these to you, and all you will really have to do is just drag and drop it just like that into your assets folder. These sprites and these audio files, essentially, they will kind of help us populate the whole scene. Hey everybody. At the time of making this video, I had forgot to emphasize something, which is why I'm making this video, because it's a little bit important. So along with this lecture, you will find this resources folder, and you can drag and drop this resources folder here, right under assets. It's going to take a little while, so give it a couple seconds, and Unity will go ahead and import all of those resources in for you. Once Unity is done importing, if you go here in the sprites, one of the things that I want to emphasize is all of these sprites that we're going to use, they need to have a texture type of Sprite 2D and UI. So if in your case, if they are set to anything else, if they're set to default or anything else really, we want to change them all to Sprite 2D and UI. So you can go ahead and select all of the ones that are not essentially Sprite 2D and UI, and you can change them on to Sprite 2D and UI. Once you have gone ahead and done that, don't forget to scroll at the bottom here and hit the apply button. So now that it's done, it might take a little bit of time depending on your specifications. Now these aren't very heavy files, they're all mostly just 2D, so it shouldn't take a very long time. But anyways, inside the resources folder, you can see that there are two folders. One is audio and one is sprites, and the audio contains all of the audio that we will be using, and the sprites contain all of the sprites. And once again, I will be providing these to you. So, anyways, without further ado, what we're going to do is we're going to start setting up our scene, and as we set up the scene, we'll talk about how we're going to build up this game. So over here, I'm going to click on zombie_gameplay_background. This is just going to be the background of our entire game. I'm going to go ahead and drag and drop this into our hierarchy. Okay, notice over here it says hierarchy. This is going to be the collection of all of the objects in our game. So as soon as I drop this background into the hierarchy, you can kind of see it here. I want to point your attention to these two tabs here, the scene view and the game view. Now the game view is essentially going to show you what the camera is seeing and what the output on the screen is going to be, the output that the user is going to see, okay? And the scene view is essentially going to be a place where you can pretty much sort of move your game objects around and position them and place them and, you know, rotate them if you need to, and so on and so forth. So the scene view is essentially where you'll be doing a lot of the setup, but when you hit the play button, like right now, what's going to happen is it's automatically going to switch over to the game view. So this, what you see right here, as you can see here, it says game, and this is the game view. Also, maximize on play is hit, so if that's something that you don't want to do every time you hit the play button, you can uncheck it here in the game view. And now if I hit the play button, the screen will not maximize, okay? Really quickly, I'm going to bump this scale down to 1, because you could see that when the scale was high, it was pixelating, and we do not want that. So we just want the scale to be 1x, and just as a preference, I have chosen the 5:4 resolution. Anyway, so that is a little bit about the scene view and the game view. I'm going to go ahead and delete that game object, and I'm going to drag and drop a fresh copy in just for good measure. Okay, so this is going to be our background. Okay, now the name over here is pretty self-explanatory, but I'm still going to go ahead and maybe change that over here. Notice over here on the right side you have the inspector, okay? Now the inspector is something where when you click on a game object in your hierarchy, the inspector is going to help you essentially give you a little bit more information about what the object is and where it is and what sort of components are attached to it. And if none of what I'm saying makes sense to you, then just relax, take a deep breath, and we're going to walk through this together, and it'll be all okay and rainbows and sunshine. Alright, so let's look at some of these boxes here, okay? So these boxes here are called components. As you can see, there's a transform, there's a sprite renderer, and so on and so forth. Now, when I click on my background, notice that this here, inside the transform, is basically information about where in the world my object exists, okay? So notice how it talks about the position. That is, it's currently based at the origin, which is 0, 0, 0. If I were to change the X to, let's say, 6, it would move. If I was to change it to, I don't know, -6, it would move the other way. And hopefully that kind of makes sense. So when we go into scene view, right, and when I click on it, and once you've got your game object selected, if you click here, the move tool, you can essentially drag it and you can move it along like so. And I want to point attention to the transform here. Notice how these values are changing. So essentially we're just moving this object around and we are changing its transform. Furthermore, if you hit this rotate button here, you can then sort of rotate it, and once again you can sort of see the values of the Z rotation changing, or if you want to rotate it like so, and so on and so forth. So hopefully that kind of explains a little bit more as to what the inspector is and the sort of things that you can learn in the inspector. Now for good measure, I'm going to change all of these values back to 0 for the transform and the rotation. Also here is the scale, so if you increase the scale, then you can essentially increase the scale. Goes without saying. Anyways, so what I want to do right now is essentially try and see if I can fit this background into the, and get rid of this blue stuff here. And there's a couple of ways that you can do this. One of the ways, which we've already talked about, is we could essentially just increase the size of this. So we could do 1.5, 1.5, 1.5. Now notice the z-axis doesn't really matter right now because this is the third dimension and this is a 2D image. So, haha. Not really relevant at this point, and that is one easy way of kind of filling up the space. Let's see, maybe I can bump it up to 1.7, 1.7, and 1.7, and aha, now the whole background seems to be fitting well and sweetly into our camera. Now if I hit play, notice that the user will see this amazing, beautiful background. If you want to go and maximize it, you can see what the game background looks like. Okay, so we're off to a pretty decent start. Hopefully I haven't lost anybody yet. Very quickly, what I'm going to do is in the hierarchy, I'm going to click on my background image and I'm going to rename it just for good measure because this is such a weird name. So I can go ahead and just write background. You don't have to do this, it's just bugging me, so I went ahead and did it. If you're building complex games, then naming your game objects, naming your variables, naming your assets, naming your resources is going to be really important because after a while it's going to become like a fish market and you won't know where what is and what is. So therefore I'm just going to go ahead and do that right now. I want to point your attention to this main camera here in the hierarchy, okay? Now notice this is the game view, and I've said that if you ever want to look a little bit deeper into what the game objects in this hierarchy are, you can switch over to the scene view. So we'll go ahead and do that, and I'll go ahead and click the main camera. And notice with the main camera is selected, you will see a lot of this information here. Now this main camera is the one that we get for free. When I say for free, what I just mean is that it's the one that was already there when I created the project, and we can create as many cameras as we want. But for the sake of this project, really all we need is just this one. Notice the camera also has some components to it. It also has the transform, so if I go ahead and if I were to move this around, for example, right, then notice how the camera preview here in the bottom right is also changing. So, and notice how the transform position is also changing. And I want to call out here that in the future, right, for example, And this is something that we might come across later in this project, but in general in games, if you wanted to have some sort of a recoil, right, in the game, then you could very quickly, you could think about maybe moving the camera around and maybe giving it a little bit of a jitter, making it feel a lot more sort of lively. Now, in that case, you wouldn't have to move the whole world around, you would just have to move the camera around. I say this because a lot of games, first-person shooters, or any other game where there is any sort of camera shake, it is essentially that it is a camera shake. So yeah, that was just something that was worth mentioning. And I'm going to go ahead and zero these out. The value of z here is by default -10, and this is just an arbitrary value, and that is so that the camera is in fact in front of the background and it is looking at the background. So if I go and switch to 3D mode just for the sake of explanation, notice this is how it looks, and you can see the blue line, which is the forward direction of the camera. It's looking right into that background. Now if you're wondering how I did that, I clicked on this button here and you can switch views. So really that's all it is. But that's about what I wanted to say. Now, I want to talk about how we will be building the game. The way we will be building the game is that there are going to be these zombies which are going to be creeping up over here from these little holes, and we are going to be splashing them. So we need to go ahead and put some zombies in our scene. So over here in the resources folder, I have this My Zombies 1. Not the best way to name it, but it is what it is. And yeah, go ahead and just drag and drop the zombie into the hierarchy. Now notice that the zombie is nowhere to be seen. Not in the scene view, not in the game view. If I hit the play button, I may or may not see it. I do not see it. So what's happened here? Well, what's happened here is that the camera is essentially trying, Unity is essentially trying to draw two objects, and it's drawing both of those objects right on top of each other. So to that end, what we have to do is we have to tell Unity that we want to draw the zombie in front of the background. And we can do this by changing the order. Okay, so if I go here on my zombie, notice how there is a sprite renderer. The sprite renderer is essentially responsible for actually rendering the graphic onto the screen. So if I go to my background, for example, and if I untick here, this sprite renderer, then it gets rid of the whole background. So, and if I check it back, it enables it. So also, if you want to enable or disable a specific component on a game object, you can go here in the hierarchy and you can uncheck and basically disable that component. I say this because the sprite renderer is going to be important, because the sprite renderer, you can tell it, hey, what the order of drawing objects is. And in this case, what I want to do is I want to draw the zombie object on top of my background. So I'm going to try and give it a order in layer value of 1. And all it is basically the way it sorts those layers. As soon as I change the order in layer of the zombie to 1, then the zombie is now being drawn on top of the background. If I now go and make my background 2, then you can imagine that the background will now be being drawn in front of the zombie. I'm going to go ahead and change this back to 0, and I hope that this kind of makes sense. It's essentially like taking paper cutouts and then putting one in front of the other, and you need to know which one you need to place in front. Okay, so now that I have my zombie in my scene, notice I can switch over to my scene view and I can start moving this guy around. Now I can keep clicking on these objects, or sorry, these buttons here, or I can quickly just use the keys on my keyboard. So for example, if I use the E button, I can quickly rotate it. If I use the W button, I can quickly move it. If I use the R button, I can quickly scale it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and undo all of those changes. And the reason why I explain this to you is because you're free as you're learning, to basically use these buttons. But in case if you ever see me doing some of this stuff and you're wondering, holy crap, how did he do that? It's maybe just me using the hotkeys, as since I'm kind of used to that. And as you start using this more and more, you will get used to it also. Anyways, so as you can see, I can go ahead and move this zombie. And what's going to happen is in our game, we're going to position our zombie something like this. So we're going to position him under the ground. And when the game starts and the zombie spawns, he's going to move up like so, and it's going to feel like he's coming out of a hole. The way we're going to accomplish this effect is we're going to put the zombie here, and on top of the zombie we're going to put something called a mask. Now the mask is, I'm going to drag and drop this mask here from my resources folder onto the screen, and the mask is just going to be a blank sort of a black game object. Now you don't see anything because it is being drawn behind the background, so what we'll do is we'll go ahead and put the order in front of everything, because we want the mask to be being drawn in front of everything. The order for the zombie was 1, so for the mask we'll try 2, and now if I move the mask around, you'll be able to see all the mask is just a black sprite that is just being drawn, and we can use this black sprite essentially to go ahead and cover up our zombie. Okay, I hope that kind of makes sense. It's just like, once again, a couple of sheets of paper, and in our game what we'll do is we'll go ahead and place all of our zombies like here in front of all of these little holes in the ground, and then we'll conveniently cover them up with a mask. And when the game starts, what we'll do is we will start, we will move the zombies from here like so, increasing their Y position, right? We talked about the transform. So notice as I move it up and down, the Y position changes, but all the other positions, the X and the Y and the rotations, they all stay the same, right? And that makes sense because this green direction here, it also is the Y direction. So what we'll do is we'll essentially be tweaking the Y coordinate of the position, the transform, and we will be moving it up, and once it gets to a certain point we will start moving it back down. And because of the help of the mask, it's going to feel as if the zombie is really coming out of a hole in the ground, but it won't really be coming out of a hole. It'll just be like an illusion trick that we do, and that is essentially what game development is. It's just a bunch of illusions. Okay. So with that said, what I'll do is I'll start placing some of these zombies. I'm going to go ahead and get rid of this mask in my scene for now, and I'll go ahead and position some of these zombies. Now I already have been tweaking around with these zombies a little bit, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to use some of the values that I know, and you're free to go ahead and use these values or any other values which work for you. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and use some of these values that I have already prepared. I want to say that the values, when I'm copy pasting these values here, I don't want you to freak out. I don't want you to think like this is some crazy magic that just happened and these numbers popped in my head, because they didn't. Okay, these were just numbers that I have sort of already tweaked, and just for the sake of not wasting your time, I'm kind of going over this in a quick manner. Now what I did was I went ahead and dragged and dropped a lot of these zombies in my scene. Of course you can't see any of them because unlike the first one, all of the rest of them are at order layer 0. If you want to select multiple objects in the hierarchy, you can hold down the shift key and you can select the first one and the last one, and it selects all of them, and then this way I can go ahead and change their order to 1 all at the same time. And at this point what you would be doing is essentially you would be going and you would be putting them in like so, and why not, let's just do that together. You know what, so we'll go ahead and do that here, and just for our sake, let's just go ahead and go in order. So we'll put this one here. Okay, so that'll be the first one, and then the second one is here. Let's see, the third one can be this one, and the fourth one is going to be over here. And we can go ahead and tweak these later on, just if these values are not perfect, if their positioning are not perfect, then we can always go and change these later. So I'm going to go ahead and move this guy here, and I think we're missing one more. We can drag and drop another guy from here, or we can just duplicate one of this. All I have to do is Control C and Control V, and now I have another copy. Since I duplicated it, the order was already updated. Okay, so that is what it is, and everything is looking all right. So now what we can do is we can go ahead and create a mask. Alright, yeah, so now that we've gone ahead and placed all of these zombies in place, what I'm going to do is just to keep my hierarchy, essentially in order, what you can do is we can sort of put these guys in a single container and we can call that zombies. So if I right click here in my hierarchy, I can create an empty game object. I can go ahead and rename this game object now zombies. Now notice how this empty game object, if I go in my scene, if I double click on it, it's just laying somewhere at this weird transform, position, rotation, etc. And I just want to recenter this, so I can click on this. If I hit on reset, it resets the entire transform. Now this is an empty game object, okay? And what I'll go ahead and do is I'll click on all of my zombies, and at this point I'll drag and drop them under my zombie game object, okay? So now all of these zombies are essentially coupled together. Remember when we talked about enabling and disabling game objects? So if I now go ahead and click here on the check mark, it will disable that game object, and therefore it will also disable all of its children, okay? And I can enable them back by clicking on this check button. This is not really important to the game per se, but this was just one of those Unity things that I thought were worthwhile mentioning. Okay, so now that we've got all of our zombies, we want to go ahead and get some masks in the game, okay? So let's go ahead and drag and drop a mask. And once again, we want to change the order priority, so we'll make that 2, I believe. And we'll really quickly check and see if that in fact works, and sure enough, it does. Also, you can use your mouse wheel to kind of scroll in the scene view just to see where you're placing these masks. And at this point, if you guessed it, we are going to go ahead and place these masks, okay? So I'm going to try and place these masks quickly. In fact, we'll start here on the left. Okay. Go ahead and do that. And you can fine tweak it as per your requirements. I'm not going to waste too much time, yours nor mine. I'm going to quickly start placing some of these here. And I'm duplicating them by Control-C and Control-V. You can also use Control-D to duplicate as well. Okay, so go ahead and start placing all of those masks. And notice all we're doing is really just covering these zombies up nice and good. All right. Okay. So that looks good. If I switch over to my game scene now, everything looks like it's in order, everything looks good, and we pretty much have our scene ready to go. We've kind of talked about in this episode, we've talked about essentially, setting up the scene, some of the basic general things about Unity, such as the transform and so on and so forth. We've talked about rendering orders for the graphics on our screen, and we've also kind of talked about. Hey everybody, and welcome back to part 2 of our zombie smashing game. So in the first video we were essentially just doing a lot of the setup and just getting our background and all of our zombies and the masks in, and today we'll actually start to maybe look at the code and try and put some behavior in the game. Okay, now really quickly I'm just going to go ahead and organize like we did last time. So I'm going to create an empty object, just call it masks, just so that we don't have a lot of these things here just redundantly lying around, pretty much just populating our hierarchy, and now it's a little bit easier and simpler. Okay, so today what we're going to do is we're going to start working on the zombies and their behavior, and we talked about how essentially we are going to be moving their transform and bringing them up like so, making them move like here and then back down again. Okay, now, so to go ahead and do that, we're going to have to start looking into code and scripting. So the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to create a folder under our assets, and this is going to be where we keep our scripts. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new folder. I'm going to call it scripts, and I'm going to go ahead and go inside scripts, and this is where we will create our first script. Now, before I go into and jump into the script, what I want to say is that the focus of this project is going to be try and keep things as beginner friendly as possible. I say that because a lot of the decisions that I'll be taking might not be the best in terms of optimization or the best in terms of good practices, but they are going to hopefully be a good sort of a starting introduction point into game development. So with that said, what we are going to do is we're going to be working towards creating a game manager. Okay, so a game manager is going to be basically a script which is going to be responsible for understanding what's happening in the game. It's going to be responsible for spawning our zombies, it's going to be responsible for keeping track of our health, and so on and so forth. And the way we're going to do this is we can right click here and we can do create a C# script, and we can call this game manager. Okay, now we can, to actually get a script to have impact within our scene, we need to actually put it in our scene, and the way we can do that is we can actually put it on a game object. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create an empty game object. I'm going to call it game manager, and I don't have to call it the same name. I just chose to do so because it's a little bit simpler to look for my game manager later on. But here I have an empty game object. Once again, I'm going to reset this. It doesn't matter in this case because this will not have any actual physical sort of representation in the world, but just for the sake of consistency. And then I can drag and drop this script onto my game manager. Notice how as soon as I dropped the script on here, it kind of popped up over here, very much like the transform component. So this is our way of basically creating a component. So there are certain components which we get in Unity, and then scripts can act as components, and you can basically attach them onto game objects. So it's not uncommon for a game object such as a player to have many different components for movement, different components for input, different components for audio, so on and so forth. Okay, so now that we have created the script, we can double click it and we can open it up in Visual Studios, and it usually takes a little bit, so give it a couple of seconds and I will show you once that script is up. Okay. Alright, so when I open up the Game Manager script, this is essentially something that you should be looking at, okay? Now, this is a script, and inside this script there are two functions, that is the start function and that is the void function, okay? And we'll talk about exactly what these functions do. Okay, so now conveniently it's already commented up here, but we'll talk about it anyway. So the start function is the function that runs the first time when the game object in the game is essentially activated, okay? And the update function is going to run every single frame. So the best way for me to explain this to you is just to show it to you. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go here in my start function and I'm going to do a debug log line, and I'm just going to write start. You can write like any string in here, right? Or any combination of characters. I'm going to Control S, save this script, right? And I'm going to jump back into Unity. Now, let's quickly talk about what's going to happen. This game manager has this game manager script, okay? So we look at this game manager script here, okay? And when I hit the play button, what's going to happen is the game manager is going to look for its script and then it's going to play that message. So if I hit play now, as you can see here, that start message is shown. So if you click here, you can open your console here. Okay, it's opened on the other previous monitor, and it shows the start message twice simply because I had already checked it one time. So if I close it and if I play it again, you'll see the start message show up one time here. Okay, and you can just essentially dock the console right over here if I can figure it out. There we go. And if for some reason you cannot find the console, then you can go here in Windows and you can go in General and you can open the console from here as well. Okay, so the start function essentially runs the first time. And if I now move this debug line, okay, into update, and I'm just going to change this to update, and this is going to run every single frame. So now if I hit the play button, then this is just going to explode and just run every single frame, okay? So as you can see here, this number of debug lines is just increasing and increasing, and all of these updates here are happening, and this will continue to happen essentially until I stop. So I'm gonna go ahead and clear this, but hopefully that should give you an idea of start and update, and we're going to be using these functions quite extensively anyways, okay? So what we said was that our game manager is very much going to be responsible for, taking care of our zombies, spawning them, and, making them move up and making them move down. And in order for our game manager to be able to do that, what we need reference to our zombies in our script, okay? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make a public array of game objects, okay, and we will, in that array, we will populate it with our zombies, and in such a way, in doing so, we will then have access to our zombies in code. So the way that would look like is it would look like a public game object array, okay, of zombies, okay. So that is a public game object array of zombies. And when I save it now, right, I'm going to show you this, and this is going to be amazing, okay? We let Unity refresh, and once it's ready, all right. So now that Unity has refreshed, it gives you the zombies option here in your game manager script, and you can click on it, and it tells you to put in a size, okay? So let's say if you were to say 5, then it means it's looking for 5 elements or 5 game objects, and if it's 50, then it's going to wait for 50 game objects. So the reason why this works the way it does is because we made this game object array of zombies public, okay? If I make it private, then it will not show up in the inspector, okay? So we'll wait for Unity to reload, and you'll notice that because I made zombies private now, it's not there. So putting something public is one of the ways in Unity where you can expose that field to the inspector, and if once you expose something to the inspector, it allows you to use some easy drag and drop operations to get references to those game objects. There's a wide variety of ways in which you can find the game objects, okay, but this is one of them, and this is the easiest one, so we'll stick with it for now, okay. Switching back, since I have changed it to public, it will go ahead and reload our last 50 size, and we'll change that to 7 because that is how many zombies we have, okay. Now we can go ahead and drag and drop our zombies. So starting here, 1 and 2 and let's see. So what I'm going to do is initially I'm just going to make it 0, and then I'll just go ahead and drag and drop here. There we go, okay. And you have to drag it on top of the zombies word. So there we go. And one by one, essentially, not this one, let's go in order. Oops. Okay, let's go to our game manager again and keep dropping them. Okay. Okay, and one more. Okay. All right, so automatically, like we said, there are 7 zombies in the scene. We have dragged and dropped all of them, and now we have access to them. So essentially, for example, if we wanted access to them, then we could do something like zombies, arrow, 0, and this line of code here would essentially give us access to our first, zombie. So if you wanted to get access to it, we could do something like game object zombie equals zombie asterisk 0, and this would be our first zombie. Now we could, say zombie.setActive, zombie.move, or whatever it is that we wanted to do on the zombie. But anyways, we're getting ahead of ourselves. Okay, so now we have access to all of our zombies, okay? Now, jumping back into Unity real quick, how exactly are we going to do this? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to define some rules in our game. So one of the things that happens in our game is that the zombies come up, they come to a certain point, and then they go back down, and only one zombie at a time is really active at any point in time, okay? So we need a couple of things, right? We first need a way to choose between one of our 7 zombies, right? Once we have chosen the zombie, then we need to activate it and have it start moving upwards. And once it's moving upwards, we need to essentially, make it stop at a certain point and then make it go back down, okay? So the first thing we can deal with really quickly is how to choose a random zombie and activate it, okay? And for that, what we're going to do is we're going to create a new function, okay? So we can write a private void pick new zombie, and this is going to be a function that we write, okay? Now in this function we are going to be essentially picking a zombie, and the way we can do that is we can use Unity's built-in random generator to generate a number between 1 and 7 essentially, and just activate that zombie, okay? The other thing that we're going to have to do is once we activate a zombie, we're going to have to set some variables. So for example, one of the variables that we would need is going to be a private bool, let's see, is rising, okay? And another one that we might need is private bool is falling, okay? So we will use these variables to determine, hey, you know, is it rising, is it falling, and so on and so forth, okay? Okay, so now that we have is rising and is falling Boolean variables that we have already declared, what we'll do is we'll go ahead and initialize them to false, okay? And we'll go ahead and change them to true programmatically later on. And we'll jump back into our pick new zombie function, okay? Now, whenever we pick a new zombie, what it means is that it's now time to actually activate that zombie. So what we'll say is rising is equal to true, right? And we'll make is falling equals to false, okay? So those two things we can just get out of the way, okay? Furthermore, what we need to do is now we need to generate a random number, okay? And we can do that by creating a new variable, okay? We'll call this zombie index, and we can generate a random number, okay? So unity engine dot random dot range, okay? So if you're wondering where I got this from, well, look, as soon as I stop, it gives me a tooltip and it tells me that unity engine dot random dot range will return a random float number between the minimum and the maximum. So essentially it gives you a random number between two values, and this works for float numbers, right? So decimal point numbers, or it works for integers as well. And you just have to be careful on what is inclusive and what is exclusive, okay? So once again, you can read here that it returns a random number between the minimum and the maximum exclusive, okay? So having said that, we want to generate a number between 0 and 6, essentially, okay? The reason why we want to do that is because our array over here, okay, so if you remember, the zombies array, okay, switching back over here, notice how this element here is the 0 element, right, of our array. This is the first, second, third, fourth, fifth. So we want to generate numbers starting all the way from 0 up until 6, okay? And remember that the length of this array is 7, okay? So jumping back into our code here, what we want to do is we want to generate a number all the way from 0 to zombies dot length, okay? Zombies dot length, essentially, it goes over here, it finds our array, and it just finds the length of that array. And zombies dot length in this case is 7, therefore, it's going to generate a number between 0 and 6, because this function range does not count the upper value, it is exclusive, okay? So this is going to generate a number between 0 and 6. Okay, so now we have the index of the zombie that we want to activate, okay? So what we can do is we want to remember that information, and in order to do that, we can create another variable, okay? So I'm going to go over here, I'm going to create a private integer, private int, and I'll call it active zombie index, and by default I'll make it 0, okay? And what I'll do is I'll go ahead and save this zombie index as my active zombie index, okay? Active zombie index equals to zombie index. All right. So what have we done so far? We set is rising to true because the zombie is going to be rising now. Therefore, it's not falling. Therefore, we set it to false. We generated a random number between 0 and 6, and we saved that as our active zombie index. Okay. We probably could have just done this in one step as well, right? If you want, you can just remove this and you can essentially call this active zombie index. Okay, that works as well. Okay. Now we need to actually start moving it. So now that we've generated an active zombie index, i.e. we know which zombie we want to start moving, we need to do a couple of other things, okay? The way we're going to be moving our zombies, like we've talked about on a couple of occasions, is we're essentially going to be moving them up and down like so. But before we move them, as you can see here, and I've disabled the masks, but as you can see here, all of these zombies have different starting positions, right? Especially their y-axis, i.e. the axis that we will be moving them on, is different. So before we start moving them, we want to remember this piece of information. We want to remember where they started. Specifically, we want to know what their y position was, because what we're going to do is we're going to remember the start position, and then we're going to arbitrarily move them a certain number of units up. Okay, so let's say if we move them, let's see, I don't know, 2 or 3 units up, but once they have moved 3 units up above their starting point, we're going to start making them fall down and make sure that they come back to their start position, okay? So for that reason, remembering their start position is really important to us, okay? Now we can get their start position from their transform, okay? So once I have my zombie index, so the zombie that I want to activate, I can find that zombie in my zombies array. So in order to do that, what I can do is if I do zombies dot active zombie index, okay? So this here, this line of code, this gives me my active zombie, okay? And I know that it's giving me an error. That's because it's you know, I'm not actually equating it yet to a game object. But essentially, for the sake of explanation, when I go in my array and when I give it this index, then it's giving me that zombie, okay? What I want to do is I want the transform of that game object. So just for the sake of explanation, let's go ahead and create a game object. So game object zombie equals zombie, and we'll call this active zombie, okay? So this gives us the active zombie that we will eventually activate, okay? Now we want the transform. So what we can do is, let's say, I don't know, transform dot, and we'll call it active transform. And I will get rid of this, but I will, just for the sake of explanation, I will go ahead and show you this. So I can do active zombie dot transform, and that will give me the transform, okay? And now what I need is the position, okay? So notice how over here there is, inside the transform, there is a position, which is an X, Y, and Z. Notice that because this is a 2D game, we don't necessarily need the Z, okay? So we can just use, you know, 2-dimension vectors, okay? So what I can do is I can create a new variable. I can call it, or I can give it the type vector2. I can say start position, and I can say active transform. So I can take the transform of the active zombie and I can do position, okay? And in doing all of this, I basically get the start position of the zombie which we are going to activate, okay? Now I could have just as easily done this very differently. I could have done, if I comment this line out, okay, I could have done vector2 dot, in fact, let's do it a little bit differently. Since we want to remember the start position, let's declare it over here at the top of the script, okay? We'll do private vector2 start position, okay? And we'll call the start position by default, we'll just give it 0.0f, okay? Or in fact, you know what? It's not a float, so we'll just leave it as start position, okay? And over here in pick new zombie, what we can do is start position equals, okay, zombies. We in the array zombies, we're looking for the zombie with this index, okay, dot transform dot position, and boom, okay? So essentially we did the same thing, right? Over here we first found the active zombie, then we did dot transform, so we did dot transform, then we did over here dot position and therefore dot position. So we can kind of quickly do that, and all of this amounts to the same thing. Okay. All right. So now we have found out which zombie we are going to essentially activate, and we also know its starting position. Okay. Moving forward, we will essentially be looking at the logic for moving this zombie up and down. Okay, I think this is a good starting. So now we have found the zombie that we want to activate, and that's the zombie that will be moving up and down. I think this is a good stopping point, and I think we've just learned a lot of new things. So let's take a deep breath, and we'll come back in the next video and start off here.